You speak for about 51,000 minutes a year. That's the average person. Meetings, phone calls, voice notes, ideas that you say out loud that nobody hears. 51,000 minutes. And it's only about 3 to 4% that's actually unique. The rest is repetition, rephrasing, explaining the same thing to a different person on a different day. Not a single AI tool you're using right now knows the difference. They treat every word with equal weight, every email with equal importance. I've spent over 25 years building technology from a trading robot at Deutsche Bank to cloud platforms to an AI company that I scaled to over 1,000 people. Not reviewing AI on camera, building it, deploying at scale. And I can tell you with certainty, the biggest problem in AI right now is a lack of meaning, a lack of context, which is essential for intelligence. And this is exactly what we've set out to build. The AI industry has confused bigger memory buffer with a better mind. Everyone is in an arms race for context windows, 128,000, Claude recently did 1 million, soon I'm sure we'll have 10 million tokens. It's as if stuffing more words into the machine somehow make it understand more. It doesn't. That's like reading a whole library before answering a yes or no question. That's not intelligence. In my view, that's somewhat anxious building anxiety. Real intelligence is compression. It's knowing what matters, what doesn't, and what can be safely thrown away. Human expertise works like that. You don't become an expert by remembering everything. You become an expert by forgetting the right things and remembering the key things that are important for the context of the work you're doing, the question you're being asked, the conversation you're having. So the danger is simple. The industry is brute forcing understanding instead of really building it. And what do I mean by brute forcing? It's like iterating, trying again and again, accepting the fact that the first set of answers are going to be wrong. And brute force, when the machine sounds human-like, looks really impressive until you look up close and see the details. Intelligence is not about how much context you can stuff in. It's about how much you can discard and still be right. Remember, forgetting is actually a really important tool that our minds have built. It's not a mistake, it's a part of the science. Today's models can often reason over the text you give them really well, but meaning is different to reasoning. Reasoning is this ability to manipulate what's in front of you, to jump between strands, effectively to predict or to infer. Meaning is the ability to know what something really is, why it matters, how it connects to other things, and to retain it across time, but also to see how it evolves over time. Current AI systems do reasoning reasonably well, but they're pretty weak on meaning. And that's why I say it's like a brilliant stranger. Ask a great question and it sounds profound, sounds like it has a doctorate, come back tomorrow and it's forgotten who you are, what you care about, what decisions are already made and why. That's not understanding, that's not meaning. It's just almost theatrical performance. And now you've started to see some of these systems actually remember some of your prior conversations. But when you think about your conversations with the LLM in the window of all of your conversations, all your documents, all your email, it's still only a really small slither of the intelligence and meaning that matters. And this is why non-technical people need to really care. Because when AI has no meaning layer, especially a shared meaning layer, it doesn't just hallucinate facts. It confabulates context. It fills the gaps with plausible nonsense, but it sounds really coherent. But coherence is not comprehension. And I think that's the really important thing. The problem with AI today is not that it cannot talk and it doesn't sound human-like. It's that it does not truly know what your words mean, and it doesn't really know how to deliver you an effective answer. And one of the things that we care a lot about at Second Brain is this idea of the atomic unit of knowledge. It's a really important way of looking at systems today. Fundamentally, most of our knowledge today exists in files. An email's a file, a meeting note's a file, a PDF, a presentation. And our argument is that files are actually too big an atomic unit of knowledge. When you think about a file, it's got many things in it, and those things are concepts. At the same time, tokens are too small a unit of knowledge, right? They're really syllables for all intents and purposes. And so we really have zoomed in on the wrong level. Files are too big, tokens are too small, but concepts are actually the right method. And when we think about tokens, which seems to be sort of the preoccupation these days, they're really just fragments of knowledge, or fragments of language to be more precise. No human thinks in syllables. How many times have you thought about half words or a quarter of a word, and that's how you came up with an answer? On the other hand, files are just too big. They're not a single thought, they're a chain of thoughts or a chain of concepts that come together. The right unit of intelligence, the right unit of knowledge is actually a concept. Concepts are stable, they're the thing underneath words. And more importantly, the stability is key because it's about people, it's about decisions, it could be about a customer issue, it's about a belief, it's a contradiction. But I think the most also important thing with concepts is it's something, it's stable. You can actually see how it changed over time. You can see its drift, its propagation, how it came into a system, or how it came into your knowledge, how it drifted, who did you tell about it? And those things are really important. 10 emails, 3 meetings, and a voice note about the same issue should not live as separate artifacts. In fact, it should resolve to the 1 or 2 concepts that are covered with provenance, so explainability, and then actually gets reduced. So you don't really need the 14 artifacts, because across those 14 artifacts, you probably end up having a huge amount of repetition. And that's how we think, right? We think in meaning first, language second. In fact, language is really the method of transmission. Meaning is the method of store. AI today largely does the reverse. It processes language and hopes the meaning falls out. Fluency isn't understanding. That's the sentence that changed how I think about every AI tool on the market. LLMs are so good at sounding smart that we confuse their output for comprehension. But what they're doing isn't thinking. It's prediction, and it often ends up in confabulation. I wrote a 12-minute briefing on the distinction and why it matters for anyone building with AI or buying AI right now. If you want access, you can click on the link below. The atomic unit of intelligence is not the token, it's not the file, it's the concept. And to that concept, you can connect all the text, videos, images across all your sources. And suddenly you now have understanding. I look at a lot of videos online, a lot of content, and one of the things that we talk about a lot is this sort of echo chamber. When you start looking at certain posts on LinkedIn or on any of those social media platforms, you often get more and more of the same as the algorithms start trying to give you more of what you're looking at. And then you walk across the road and you speak to someone who's not in AI or in sort of the bleeding edge of tech, and you realize just how far the gap is. If you're talking to them about a Sonnet model and they're asking you what's Claude, it gives you a really big sense of sort of the gap. And I think that gap becomes even more profound when you start to look at sort of what the commentators are talking about. We have a lot around markdown files, a lot around prompts, and I think that's missing a beat. I spent a lot of my life building systems across different industries, from trading when I was at Deutsche Bank, working on systems that touch real memory in 2004. I was too early to the cloud, but I could see that computing was going to become a utility long before that was fashionable, that you wouldn't buy software, that you would rent it. I even remember it took many years to get Microsoft to give us a license to be able to rent Microsoft Office. I've lived through a number of platform shifts to know that the loudest conversation is rarely the most important one. It might be the one that's contextually more relevant this moment, but as we've seen in just the last year, that context shifts and moves quite quickly. This first direction of travel on the waypoints it's taking is actually towards the North Pole. It's not going left, it's going north. And I think that's really important when you start to think about these shifts in technology. Sometimes it looks like we're going in the wrong direction, but we sometimes need to go that way to be able to then make the turns to land up where we need to land. What people miss is that every technology wave we've seen has really had these 2 phases. First comes sort of raw capability, the excitement around it, the tinkerers that are really coming up with ideas. And we've seen that with a number of technology around AI. We had like MCP was going to be everything, and then suddenly MCP is dead. Then started to see people say, RAG was everything, and now we're hearing RAG is not everything. And so we're starting to see these waves. And I think what's interesting in this cycle is those waves are a lot shorter. So you have this first wave around raw capability. Then you have the second wave, which is really the organizing principle. So if we imagine we go back a little bit, for the internet, it was search. For mobile, it was the app store. And I think for AI, it's going to be meaning. And that's the wall that many people, enterprises, teams are hitting right now. The models are very impressive, but they're effectively stateless. They don't really know the company. They don't know you. They don't know your history. They don't know the conversation you had yesterday. They don't really understand the contradictions, which is a really important facet. They don't know what was forgotten or why it was forgotten. It's kind of like a contradiction in its own terms. The next winner in AI is not the one that talks the smoothest. It'll be the one that really understands the deepest. And that's really what we're so excited about. At Second Brain, meaning is really important. We believe that the future of intelligence is really down to three pillars, right? You've got meaning, reasoning, and emotion. I think we're ways away from emotion being a facet that we think about within AI, but meaning and reasoning combined take us quite far down that path. And this is exactly what Second Brain is really trying to solve. We're not out to build another AI wrapper or another chatbot with file access. We're really trying to build that cognition layer, that meaning layer, a cognitive architecture that remembers, organizes, updates, and reasons what actually matters. One of the biggest beliefs that we have is that we went from a system of files that we used to file. Then search came along and we no longer needed a file. We could just find things. And now we've ballooned in the amount of information we have that we're spending 2 to 3 hours a day trying to find things. The Second Brain mission is really simple, which is how can we almost remove search down to, 10 minutes a day as opposed to 2 to 3 hours. And once you've built a layer that understands meaning and is able to connect that meaning to the different artifacts you have, terabytes or gigabytes of emails and documents and chats and now AI notes and meeting notes that you've got, and is able to actually connect them and see how they evolve, what you've created is a knowledge layer that really understands you, your team, your organization, and has permissions all the way through so that the right person asking the right question gets an answer that's relevant to what they would normally be able to get an answer to in their ordinary course of business. And we've built 3 surfaces above. Cora is your AI chief of staff. It's like the bird on your shoulder. She'll answer questions, but more importantly, she understands continuity. She can say, hey, look, you're writing this document, you wrote the opposite last week, and this decision conflicts with that meaning. This relationship changed 3 months ago. And I think those are really important because what you're really doing is you're recognizing that meaning is both stable, but it evolves. So Cora is your chief of staff. Canvas is the notebook that writes itself. So many of us get a new notebook app. We get a lot of excitement for the first couple of weeks, and then actually it's like a decay curve to actually using it. No one really keeps it up to date. And so we said, well, what if we could build a notebook that was built on top of your intelligence? Not necessarily organized by folders, but really organized by people, concepts, organizations, and artifacts. And the idea is, click on a name, click on a concept, click on a company, click on an artifact, and then see all the other 3 things connected to it. So if I clicked on Sachin, I would see companies, the other people, the concepts, and I'd also get this really rich 3-paragraph summary right at the top that gave me a quick up to speed on everything that I have with Sachin. And then the third surface is Kit. Kit is the platform that really lets you build agents and classical software on top of your intelligence. So the beauty with this is you can now build software, you can build agents that read and write from your intelligence, therefore compounding it and growing it. No longer having these silos of data that you're actually pushing information to. For anyone that uses more than one AI, maybe you use ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini, one of the things that becomes really clear is you start to have this asymmetry of what context is where. And really what we're trying to do is bring it all together. And the magic of this is that it really stops becoming theoretical very quickly. A really good example is with my kids, where we've built a digital piggy bank on top of it. It scores homework, it verifies chores from photos, it asks comprehension questions on the books that they've read. And an 8-year-old is now effectively using a cognitive operating system in its most early version without needing to know what the phrase even means. Every other AI tool forgets you when the conversation ends. Second Brain doesn't. And remembering is where understanding begins, because that's where compounding, meaning, drift, and propagation all come together. If you want to have early access to Second Brain, and we'd love to have you there, and be the first to access when we launch on 02/06/26, then all you need to do is click on the link below.